Dromai is the best budget deck in the entire game, in my opinion. You have access to most of her power for under $100, and with one upgrade, you unlock the rest of it. So today I'm going to show you two different versions of budget Dromai that you can try out and bring to either your armories or your pro quests this season and find some level of success with them. I think these decks are pretty good for the budget restriction that I gave myself on them. Both lists will be in the description below, as well as my Patreon guide on how to play every single matchup as Dromai. Jumping right into the things is the deck that I'm a little bit more known for playing, which is Big Dragon Dromai. The goal of this version of the deck is to play a bit more of a defensive style while you start developing your board slowly until you find a point in the game where you can take over the board and swarm your opponent with dragons. This version of the deck is extremely good in late game scenarios and is exceptional at beating fatigue decks. The core of the deck is we pretty much just have every single dragon that we can play in the deck. The only ones that we're not including is Vincerakai. That's not really great right now. I personally don't play Dominia. You can choose to play that in the deck if you would like. I just have bad luck with that card. And Optimi also not very good right now. We have a handful of defensive cards like Fate Foreseen, Sink Below, Sigil Solus, Sand Cover, and Oasis Respite, so that way we can cover up some of the either aggro decks or the dominate decks such as Azalea. Oasis and Sand Cover double as a tool versus arcane damage decks such as Icelander. We've got enough blues that we can pay for Frostbites and play some of our bigger dragons when we need to. Remembrance covers our fatigue plan quite a bit, giving us a way to cycle back resources into the deck. And then beyond that, we just have some efficient red cards, such as Ravenous Rabble, Burn Them All, and some of our red attacks like Billowing Mirage. Notable budget inclusions into the deck. Most of the money in Dromai, like honestly, the core of Dromai is pretty cheap. All of the money is in a couple staple cards that, like, as you play Fab, you should just own these cards at some point, but until then, you know, you gotta make do. We're playing Diadem of Dream State over Crown of Providence, and then to pair with it, Celestial Kimono over Flamescale Furnace. Pretty much the entirety of your budget as Dromai goes into your helmet and your chest of Crown of Providence and Flamescale Furnace, as well as Command and Conquer and Enlightened Strike if you play those cards. It's not that big of a deal not playing Command and Conquer and Enlightened Strike in the deck. They are marginal upgrades over other cards, but if you have them, you're gonna play them. But they're not like so significantly better than the alternative that you just like can't play the deck without them. They're just good cards. Furnace is kind of tough to not play with, and that is, spoiler alert, where I'm going to say you want to put your money first when you go to look for upgrades. You're going to want Furnace, but until then, we have this. This is a functional addition to the deck that lets you still play the game. The Diadem is actually very good in Dromai. You can compare this with a Kimono, so that way you can get a free Ponder token, and in Dromai, almost every single card in your deck is an exceptionally good arsenal, so you're almost always willing to take a random card off the top of your deck. So preventing 3 life and getting a free card draw, that's very powerful, and you're not giving up that much, honestly, to get that. Also, if you're able to protect your Diadem for another turn, you can use it instead with your Wave of Reality or your Kimono if you're able to leak enough damage where either of these are destroyed from Ward, but not your Diadem, so you can use the Diadem again next turn. If you're able to get more than 1 Ponder out of Diadem, this card is actually insane. Just remember, when you're playing this without the Furnace, and the other version of the deck also, you will be a little Ash hungry at times because you don't have access to the ability to convert any red into a resource to make an Ash with your Flamescale Furnace. You have this instead. So you will need to play slightly differently, and this is where cards like Seekers and Time Skippers can come in, where they let you pitch some cards early in the game to get your Ash engine going, but later on in the game you will need to be a little cognizant over how you utilize your Ash. So maybe you don't want to run out all of your what I like to call Ash negative cards. These are dragons that will not produce an Ash when you play them because they cost 0 or produce more dragons than the amount of cards that you're pitching into them. So a 0 cost dragon is Ash negative. Rake the Embers will make Ash when you pitch to play it, and then it itself makes an Ash, but then it makes 3 dragons, so you go down an Ash when you play this. Same with Uvia. You do need to be a little more cognizant of that, so you might want to pitch these cards to later on in the game where you might not need to worry about that as much. General rule of thumb when you're playing Dromai, try not to go to 0 Ash, especially in Big Dragon, as it's much harder to get out of the cycle of 0 Ash when you're playing this version of the deck. A quick aside before I move on to the second deck list is I'm debating on making a video primer on the 101 aspects of Dromai, such as Ash economy and the value of different dragons and such, just like all the basics of the deck. If you guys have any questions about the deck or things you don't understand, please tell me in the comments so I can start structuring what I want to talk about in these videos. The second version of the deck that we're going to look at is a Redline aggro list. This list is far more aggressive than the other one, where we're looking to block very aggressively in the Big Dragon version. In this version, you're not really looking to block, you're looking to use the other number in the corner of the card. You have a lot of very high value hands that scale up with the more cards that you have. You're generally trying to play a mix of dragons and attack action cards. The trade-off is that what you lack in blocking value, you make up for in your raw aggression and having a much better matchup into other aggro decks. One nice thing into those aggro decks is, since you're playing a mix of attack actions and dragons, when they have a random popper in their hand, it doesn't hose you nearly as much, since you're generally going to be playing rounds like Ravenous Rabble into a Blaze Headlong, and then you'll play your dragon and swing. So if they pop you, you already got to use all the cards in your hand and present quite a bit of damage, so they don't get as much value out of their poppers as they would versus big dragons. In this version of the deck, we still play quite a few dragons, but we are not playing nearly as many of the expensive ones like Necria, though we still do want some Thamais for Icelander, and potentially an Uvia versus the longer, grindier games. Having access to one is nice. We might not use it though, but having one on the list is nice as an option. We have a lot more attack action cards like Blaze Headlong, Flame Call Awakening with a Phoenix Flame to go with it, Snatch, Ravenous Rabble, and notably we also have Skittering Sands as another pseudo dragon in the deck. As I mentioned before, you're trying to play a lot of attack action cards, so some of the rounds that you're looking to do will be something like playing a Ravenous Rabble as the start of your turn. Now that we've played a red, we can play something like a Flame Call Awakening, pitching one of the other reds in our hand. This is going to generate us an Ash and grab a Phoenix Flame, and then we can pitch that Phoenix Flame to play another card in our hand, making another Ash for pitching that Phoenix Flame, making this essentially like a Sweeping Blow-esque effect. Flame Call is much better when we do have the Furnace, since we can then pitch the Phoenix Flame into the effect of Flame Scale Furnace, making 2 resources instead of 1, but it still functions in this deck. You just need to be more aware of that in your deck building. As you notice, we are not really playing any 2 costs other than the Uvia and the Thamai for that very reason. So when we play a 1 cost off of it, it's about the same thing, though we do limit ourselves to not being able to play 2 1 costs off of the Phoenix Flame. And that's why we're playing something like Skittering Sands. This is another chain starter for our Flame Call Awakenings. You want to start in density of red 0 cost cards that let you open the turn with, so that way you're able to keep a hand that's like a 0 cost, a Flame Call Awakening with a card to pitch into it, and then another card that you want to play off of the Phoenix Flame that you grabbed off of your Flame Call Awakening. Some notable budget inclusions. Again, we're doing the Diadem and the Celestial Kimono, same idea. This is cheap and it gives us a lot of value in the deck to make up for what we lose in the other armor. We don't have Command and Conquer, and this list does want cards like that, so we do want something to replace it. Breaking Point is a very good replacement for that. Again, it costs 1, so it still functions off of what we were talking about earlier with the Flame Call Awakening grabbing a Phoenix Flame. And one of the playlines that we are looking to do with this is find a hand with a Rake the Embers and a card to pitch into the Rake and a card to pitch for the Breaking Point. We play the Rake the Embers, we swing with our Ash Wings, and then we play the Breaking Point afterwards. This list really wants some cards like Enlightened Strike or Miraging Metamorph, but as those are quite a few more dollary dues than some of these other bulk cards, I needed to find a replacement for that. I still wanted a go again card like Enlightened Strike, so I went with one of my favorite cards in the entire game, and I'm sad I haven't casted this more often. Mischievous Meeps. Can we get some Meeps in the chat? This card is still very good. It generates an Ash when you play it if you pitch a red to play it, and then it says you have to give me a card or some armor to this, forcing our opponent to interact, because if this hits, we will draw a card. Generally, the item side of this effect doesn't really come up too often, but it can. Now, generally, this is a much worse effect than our other effects like Snatch, but importantly, it is a go again, so it lets us push our board, and you do end up hitting a critical mass of on-hit draw effects with Kyloria, Meeps, and Snatch, where you might overwhelmed how much armor and blocking value they have. Imagine a turn where you present multiple of these in the same turn. It can be very difficult for your opponent to block that all out, and you might end up getting through with one of them. Also, because we're playing cards like Snatch, we do want the Snapdragon Scalers instead, as it's a very good chain starter. We can just open with the Snatch or the Dust Up and then snap it and let that dictate the rest of our turn, letting our opponent decide whether or not that draw effect matters. Now, since we're such a Redline focused build that isn't looking to pitch very many resources to play most of our cards, we are skimping quite a bit in the resource department. We pretty much always want Passing Mirage in the deck, period, because it helps us deal with some of our more difficult matchups like Guardian, but we still want a few more blues for a couple matchups. I ended up going with Time Snap Potion as a one-of that we can bring in versus Guardian to help us push our board or put the Passing Mirage into play. And then one of the only other matchups that I really want extra blues in is going to be Icelander, and Energy Potion is one of the best blues in that matchup, as you can play it and then find a spot later on in the game where the extra resources are going to matter when they try taxing you. Importantly, these are all not attack action cards, so if we change one of the cards in the list to one of the upgrades we might theoretically want, we don't have to change anything in that department. That card being Nourishing Emptiness. Nourishing Emptiness is pretty good in this version of the deck. What you can do, since we're not playing any blue attack action cards, is we can use our Burn Them All to remove all of the red attack action cards from our graveyard, so the Nourishing can still end up having text later on in the game, not just as an opener at the start of the game. And that's it for the deck lists. As you can see, we've got $90 over here, and then we've got $100 over here, right on the nose, $100. So these decks, very budget. For $100, I think we're getting quite a bit of power. I think we're close to like 80% of the potential that Dromai has, and with just a couple inclusions, we get back up to full power, and most of these are staples that you're going to eventually have in your collection anyways. But let's go into where we should start by putting our money when we want to start making some upgrades. I mentioned this a couple times in the video already, but Flamescale Furnace is probably the #1 card that you want to get for the deck when you're looking to upgrade it. This opens up a lot of play lines for the deck, and it's a good blocking chest piece, which is very high value. You just start the game with extra life. That's pretty good. Its ability to open up your access to 2-cost cards, as well as generating extra ash over the course of the game, cannot be understated. This is pretty much a must-have for the deck when you're looking to make some upgrades. Now, if you had looked at this a little while ago, it would have been cheaper. It was going for about $70 not too long ago. I think if you're a little patient and you want to wait, you can pick this up for close to the $70 range, but if you want it now, I think this is worth the $100 inclusion in the deck. Next upgrade I would look to make would be our helmet. We do ideally want to play Crown of Providence. It is a better card. It helps us block when we more specifically want to block, like, oh, our opponent is presenting us an on-hit that we want to give them like a card in armor or something like that on, where with Ward, we don't get to choose when we get that effect. Also, the ability to cycle out our arsenal to either avoid a Command and Conquer, or we park a doo-doo card in our arsenal and we don't want that anymore. And I do find that I use that a lot, where I end up with like an extra blue in my hand that I don't want to play, I don't get a chance to block with it, I don't want to pitch it, so I just put it in arsenal because I still have my crown up, and I'll just cash that in for a better card later. Now, if you want to upgrade your helmet and you don't want to spend $70 on a card, you can always just play Skullcap instead. Skullcap is still a very good card. Mara was playing this in her list with Crown of Providence, actually, so that way she could have an additional block versus Lexi. Now, another helmet you could look at getting is Crown of Dominion instead. Now, this is another case of it was a little bit cheaper a few days ago before Mara's spoiler, so you could potentially wait and pick this up later after the price dies down a little bit. But this lets you start the game with a gold, which you can use to create some ash at the beginning of the game by pitching 2 reds into it and drawing a card. But also importantly, we might see the deck shift more towards Royal anyways with Tome of the Imperial Flame. This card's very good, and I imagine is going to be an auto-include in the traditional Redline versions of the deck, bringing it back to Empress Dromai. And if that's the case, you end up not needing Crown of Providence anyways, because this is just going to be the optimal version potentially. Bit of a gamble if you want to pick that up now, but consider that at least. I'll be definitely making some content in the future talking about that version of the deck though. After that, I would just look to pick up my staples like Command and Conquer and Enlightened Strike. You should just have these in your collection, as I already said, and they are very good in the deck. Command and Conquer just kind of buys you space against the decks that you find yourself blocking a lot against. If they give you a spot to keep some cards and you play this, it makes them block, and then that gets you into a better cycle of the game where you can start being more proactive. And then Enlightened Strike is just a versatile card. You can either use this as your go again for the round, or draw a card, which, as I already mentioned, your average card is very good in the deck, so you'll take a random arsenal most of the time, or just have a 2-card 7, which is sometimes good enough. And once we have Furnace, Command and Conquer is far more enticing. We're not looking to play 2 costs without the Furnace, because we're looking to go play a 1 cost, pitching a red, then Furnace pitching another red, making 2 resources, then play the Command and Conquer. Before then, we don't really want to play this card that much. It's not very good. It's very below rate if we're pitching 2 cards to play this, or having to wait for a blue to play it, which is kind of tough. And on that same note, once we have the Furnace, Nourishing Emptiness is a good inclusion in the deck. Kind of touched on this earlier, but cards are just good in the deck. It's not that much, so if you want to pick these up, that's a fine inclusion in the deck, but I wouldn't grab these until you have the Furnace. Miraging Metamorph is a card that kind of comes in and out of the deck. It's just a good value attack. It's a 2-card 7 like Enlightened Strike can be, but in the case of this, it makes an Ash when you do it because you're pitching a red to play it. Enlightened Strike, when you bottom a card, that is not going to count as a pitch, so you're not making an Ash when you do that. You do have the downside that this has Phantasm, but it could have the upside of it has Phantasm of if you have another aura in play when you do this, your opponent might not want to pop it, but that is something to consider when you're playing this card. And one last card to consider picking up, kind of in the same vein as Enlightened Strike and Command and Conquer, is Warmonger's Diplomacy. This has become kind of a staple, like, you should own this card type of thing. Now, I personally didn't play it at Nationals, so I don't think this is a must-have for the deck or anything like that, but it's something that you should have in your collection when you're getting to that point of just filling in the gaps of what do I need to own to have all the options available to me. This can be very backbreaking against other decks in the format, as they want to be able to play attacks and non-attacks, and you might not care, especially in the Redline version where you're just fine just choosing War and just setting an attack action card like a Rabble, and then just Unga Bunga playing your hand next turn. Lastly is a card that you do not need to buy. If you're looking at Dromai and going, wow, she's expensive, look at all these cards that you need to get for the deck, Footsteps is not one of them. You do not need this card. I don't think I have pretty much ever played this in the deck. It does not work with your dragons. They are not attack action cards, so this is just not a card that you want from the deck, so save your money, do not buy this. And that's it for the deck lists. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you want to see any other Dromai content, check out my top 8 Nationals deck profile right here. Deck lists will be in the description below, as well as my Patreon if you would like to see my matchup guide on how to play every single matchup as Dromai. If you have any questions, please leave them below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.